The Centers for Disease Control estimates more than 11% of school-aged children here in the U.S. have been diagnosed with ADHD. That's Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Joining us now is Dr. Avram Mack, a psychiatrist with Georgetown University Hospital. Doctor, it seems like every child I know today has been diagnosed either ADD or ADHD, and they're all on medication. And I say to their parents, we were kind of crazy when we were kids and we got through and we weren't on medication. What gives?
Well, things have evolved to some degree within psychiatry. ADHD, and now it's mainly just called ADHD, is a syndrome of inappropriate hyperactivity or impulsivity or inattention in children. And over time, we've become better at diagnosing it and recognizing what it is. Let's not forget that for those who actually have ADHD, it's important to diagnose it and treat it for various different ways in which that child will be helped and become healthier. There may be cases where not enough attention is paid to firming up the diagnosis, and there are other ways and other reasons why a child may seem impulsive or inattentive or hyperactive. We also have to remember that there are ways in which it is completely normal to act that way up until a certain point.
Yeah, and I think that's key what you're saying, that it is, yes, of course as a child I was considered to be hyper, but when it was time to sit my butt down, I sat down and I was able to concentrate and get my work done. And I may be up interrupting you getting your stuff done and all this other, but I was still able to, you know, live life. I mean, I wasn't so hyperactive that I couldn't focus on my work.
And there are some children where they can't do that.
Yeah, that's right.
And those are at core, those are the children who really need to be identified and given treatment.
Yeah. And because I'm thinking of two different families in my life right now, and the children in those families, and every one of them has been diagnosed, but I look at the children and they're all so different. I'm kind of like, are you sure this one needs it? And here's something else I've been told, that girls are very different with respect to ADHD than boys. In other words, they can almost will themselves to tamp down on some of the hyperactivity to get some work done, whereas boys can't. Thus, boys are more medicated than girls. Help me out here, Doc.
Well, that may well be what is happening on the larger scale. There clearly are differences between girls and boys, and one of the ways in which that is seen in ADHD is in terms of the hyperactivity, just as you were mentioning. There are other ways to diagnose individuals rather than just looking at them, although that is the core way in which we start out by thinking about diagnosis. But because girls often are quieter and are not hyperactive, they don't get the attention, or they don't get that, they aren't that squeaky wheel that gets the attention of teachers or other parents or friends, leading them to go in for care. So unfortunately then, girls actually get underdiagnosed and undertreated.
Really?
Because they are not, again, that proverbial squeaky wheel.
But it seems like the very essence of ADHD is that you are a squeaky wheel.
Well, it depends on where's that wheel. So hyperactivity is one part of ADHD. It's the hyperactive aspect or the impulsivity. But what about a girl who is impulsive in the sense that she can't not blurt out the answer in class? She's otherwise well behaved, but wants to get that answer out there. Or just as quietly not able to focus on her work in the class or at home, paying attention to games with the family or other tasks.
When does ADHD present? Is there any specific time in a person's life?
Well, usually the age at which it presents or comes to medical attention would be somewhere between ages 5 to 12. It used to be up until about 2 years ago that if the cutoff for diagnosis was age 7. That is to say, you needed to have demonstrated that inappropriate degree of hyperactivity or impulsivity by then. We've now extended that to an older age, age 12. And so more children probably will be diagnosed as a result of that change in our criteria. But the way to think about when the time that it's going to demonstrate itself will come is by thinking about childhood development and the recollection that kindergarten is about that age when children tend to be able to sit quietly and listen to a teacher. And as anyone who's seen this knows, there's a big difference between kindergarten and first grade and second grade.
You know, a lot of people have said that part of the problem nowadays is that we still expect children to learn the way we were expected to learn. But now that we know so much more about the development of children and ADHD, part of the way that children are able to learn better when they do have this disorder is by standing up and learning instead of being seated. So in other words, there are different ways that we can teach children nowadays. They can still learn the same amount of information, but maybe they just don't need to be in a seat. Maybe they do need to be standing up and taking notes. Sometimes that's me. Sometimes I'll stand up, and as I'm working on my show, and I'll just work, I have a little ADHD. So, and that works for me.
So if a school setting is able to accommodate that, then that's great. Schools cannot always accommodate a different style for every child. And so again, if a child needs to have to sit down, we want to make sure that we want to be able to make sure that they can do that.
Yeah, and I think I'm advocating, which I will discuss with educators, that there needs to be another way of teaching children nowadays, because just sitting still is just boring as all get out.
Well, when your ADHD is impairing you, parents and educators should not forget that there are avenues to seek extra accommodations within schools, whether that's informal practices within a particular classroom that you can achieve by talking to the teacher, or there are formalized avenues for obtaining accommodations through what are called IEPs, individualized educational plans, which are defined by federal law. So parents do have options or avenues for getting extra attention to their child.
How many children do we estimate are on medication because of this?
The number ranges, and it's hard to say. There are many. Mm-hmm. It's also important to remember that there are many children who are on medication, many who need medication but don't get it. Mm-hmm. So the numbers are not always so clear. Mm-hmm. But as I think you were saying when we first started, it seems like there's many, many, many children out there who are.
Yeah, and it seems like there is a bit of an overdiagnosis. I just hope that parents aren't jumping to a conclusion to try and find some way to deal with something that may just be a kid's just going through a little bit of a spell. I just worry about kids being on medication because, from my understanding, if kids are on medication at this point in their lives, that oftentimes this can lead to other addictions to medications, not even medications, to drugs like cocaine use, that kind of stuff.
Well, that's an important point to clarify. One way to first look at that is the fact that treatment is better than not treatment. The consequences of not being in treatment for ADHD are not only in the moment, that is to say, the inability to play well on the baseball team or to be a productive member of the classroom, but there are also interactions with peers that are diminished, and also with family life, and also the development of self-esteem. In the long term, there are risks for those who do have ADHD. There are risks that they will develop a substance use disorder to the extent that they are not treated. So it may seem paradoxical, the idea that you're treating somebody with a stimulant medication and that will reduce the risks, but it does reduce the risk of long-term substance use risk.
Dr. Avram Mack with Georgetown University, psychiatrist, thank you so much for helping us understand ADHD.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We'll be right back.